He didn't whisper it. He said it loud enough for the guard, the people behind us, and for the part of me that still wanted his approval to hear every word. She's not important. She's just with me. For a moment, I froze, not because it was new, but because it was the same wound he'd reopened my entire life. That was the exact second something inside me cracked, and something else finally stood up. I stepped forward, lifted my ID, and watched the guard's face drain of color. A siren blared, lights changed, doors locked, and the man who had spent years insisting I was nothing suddenly looked at me like he didn't recognize me at all. My name is Leora, and that was the day the world showed him a truth he never cared to see. I woke to a quiet fall morning in Boulder, the kind where the sun slips across the Rockies like it's brushing gold onto every ridge. My apartment felt still, almost too still. As I sifted through a stack of overnight emails on my tablet, the familiar logo from Internal Systems flashed at the top of my inbox. A reminder that my phone could buzz with an alert at any moment. That was the nature of the work always on call, always one unexpected message away from being pulled into something bigger than my daily routine. To most people, it looked like I spent my days clicking spreadsheets in a small office. That assumption kept my life uncomplicated and safer. My phone lit up before I could finish reading the next message. Milton's name stretched across the screen, and I already knew the tone waiting for me. He didn't ask how I was or if I was free. He launched straight into instructions, as if I were an employee on his payroll rather than someone he raised. He talked about a Sunday meeting at FinSec Tower in Denver, a consultant gathering he'd been proudly name-dropping for weeks. He expected me to be at his side, dressed appropriately, acting as the well-behaved daughter he liked to present to people he wanted to impress. I barely had time to process the demand when my smartwatch vibrated against my wrist. 3 quick pulses I recognized instantly. A security notice, FinGrid load testing day, potential instability at FinSec Tower. My chest tightened. Of all places, of all times, I stood there for a moment, stuck between 2 obligations pulling in opposite directions. Milton's need for a polished image on one side, the unspoken requirement of my work on the other. The next alert flashed brighter than the last. My decision was made for me. I exhaled slowly, staring at the warnings stacking across my screen. I had to be at FinSec Tower, and that meant I had to face Milton there too. Sunday morning settled over Colorado with a crisp edge, the kind that made the Denver skyline look sharper the closer we drove. Milton insisted on taking his old Cadillac, patting the dashboard like it was some national treasure, repeating his favorite line about how American cars were built to last. I sat in the back seat, letting his pride fill the silence while my smartwatch pulsed against my wrist with urgent updates. Another spike on level 14. Unusual load activity. Internal flags that made my stomach tighten. Every time Milton checked the rearview mirror, I lowered my wrist and dimmed the screen before he noticed. He grumbled about how I was glued to technology, how people couldn't stay present anymore. I let his words hang in the cold cabin air. Nothing I could say would change the fact that he only saw what he wanted to see. The highway curved toward Denver, and the skyline rose like a wall of glass and ambition. Milton talked the entire way about the old colleagues he expected to meet at FinSec, men who, in his mind, built the financial world with their bare hands. He listed them like a roster of legends, weaving in little reminders that he understood their world and that I, in his mind, hovered somewhere outside of it. I turned my eyes to the passing guardrails because I knew better than to challenge him. He had no idea that the building ahead was one where my presence would carry more weight than all his stories combined. Halfway into the drive, he dialed the security desk at FinSec. I listened as he told them he was on his way and casually mentioned that I didn't need to be bothered with procedural checks. The confidence in his voice lit a spark of dread under my ribs. His shortcut would land badly, and he had no idea how badly. For reassurance, I cracked open the zipper of my bag and checked the badge tucked inside. The Tier 5 emblem caught a thin stripe of sunlight and flared like a blade. I shut the bag immediately, instinctively guarding it from view. Even the hint of that badge was too much for someone like Milton to witness without asking 1,000 questions. We pulled into the FinSec parking garage, just as another alert buzzed through my smartwatch. The vibration seemed to echo in my ribs. This wasn't just a drill warming up. Something felt heavier, more deliberate. The air in the car tightened. Whatever waited inside, it wasn't going to be routine. The entrance to FinSec Tower radiated a sterile intensity. With 3 biometric checkpoints lined in a row and guards positioned like sentinels beneath the icy white lighting, Milton walked ahead with confidence, flashing his access card at the first guard and gesturing for me to follow. The guard scanned his card, then lifted his gaze to me and lingered. There was recognition there, faint but unmistakable, though he hid it behind professional restraint. Another vibration rattled against my skin. I tightened my hold on my bag as the scanner flickered and displayed a yellow warning cross-verification required. Milton groaned, muttering that this was all unnecessary and that I wasn't even staff. I handed over my driver's license, hoping the system would swallow the lie, but it rejected the card instantly. The guard's eyes shifted toward my bag with a subtle intensity that told me the moment I'd tried to avoid had arrived. My pulse climbed. Slowly, I reached in and drew out the Tier 5 badge. The blue metallic sheen caught the overhead lights. Milton's brow furrowed in surprise. But before he could speak, the scanner lit up in a two-toned alarm. The monitor shifted to red, then white, carrying the message that froze everyone. Critical asset identified. Level 5 clearance detected. Locks clamped shut behind us. Cameras pivoted. The guard straightened fully, his voice steady but edged with urgency as he asked me to wait for the commander. Milton stared at me, shocked and speechless. Footsteps echoed down the corridor until the security commander reached us, stopping directly before me with a respectful nod. "Agent Penhaven, we've been expecting you." Milton turned toward me with a look that said he was finally seeing a stranger, someone far more significant than he had ever allowed himself to believe. The moment the commander addressed me, everything around us shifted into a harsher, colder clarity. The security gates locked with a metallic snap. The overhead lights intensified to that sharp white-blue reserved for high-threat protocols, and every guard straightened as if pulled by the same unseen thread. I could feel Milton staring at me, stunned, as if he were finally realizing he had no idea who was standing beside him. Before he could process it, the commander's radio crackled with urgency. A strained voice pushed through the static level 14 shows a real breach. "This isn't part of the drill." The words landed like a blow. Milton turned toward the commander, sputtering a half-formed question, but the commander was already looking at me. "Agent Penhaven, we need direction." There was no hiding anymore, no slipping back behind the quiet life I let others assume I had. I gave a single nod, stepping fully into a role Milton never knew existed. A guard immediately approached him, requesting that he step back as the building shifted into lockdown. Milton reacted like someone had slapped him. He barked something about having an appointment, as if schedules mattered when an entire financial system was being threatened. The guard stayed steady, repeating that he was obstructing procedure. I didn't have to say a word. My silence did the work for me. It always had, but never quite like this. The commander handed me a tablet with layered access controls. "Which floor do you want sealed first?" "Agent," I input the first command, speaking the verification phrase. The nearby biometric interface recognized my voice instantly and responded with the unmistakable acknowledgement of a Tier 5 clearance. Milton's expression twisted into disbelief, like he was watching his version of me crumble. He lurched toward us, voice cracking, insisting everyone had misunderstood, insisting I couldn't possibly be who the system said I was. A security officer blocked him with methodical calm, hand poised near the emergency restraint switch. One more step and they would isolate him without hesitation. His face drained of color. The commander glanced my way. "Is he family?" I exhaled slowly. "Mark him as a visitor. Escort him to the safe room." Milton's protests faltered as they took him by the arm. I didn't turn around to watch. I stepped through the layered doors into the secure wing, leaving behind a man who had lived his whole life believing he was the most important person in every room. Now he was the one being removed from it. The control center swallowed me in a rush of cold air and relentless data. Floor-to-ceiling screens pulsed with red network pathways. each one representing a piece of the financial infrastructure being targeted. Technicians called out updates, but the room quieted when I approached the command console. They were waiting for me. A tech near the main panel spoke first. "There's a strike on the Fedwire backup gate. If they break through, interbank settlement freezes nationwide." The room tightened. The commander looked to me again, and for a moment, the entire operation balanced on a breath. I studied the map, the spreading red lines, the unstable nodes, the pressure on critical pathways. There was no margin left. Outside the glass walls, a guard's voice carried faintly through the intercom. "Visitor Penhaven is requesting to exit. Denied." I caught sight of Milton on the corner security feed. He stood in the containment room, his hands pressed against the glass, staring into the command center as if he finally understood the scale of what I was part of. His fear wasn't for himself, it was for the truth unraveling in front of him. Another tech spoke up, stammering, "We're minutes away from losing the segmented data block." This wasn't just a malfunction. It was the kind of threat capable of shaking national stability. I steadied myself and issued the orders. Initiate full segment lockdown. Shift to track 0 backup routing. Isolate every interbank endpoint. Alarms changed pitch, the system responding to my commands. Then the twist arrived, an override message flashing across the main screen. Operational command transferred primary controller Penhaven, L. A hush fell over the room. One of the younger technicians turned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're the top authority here," I answered with a single steady breath. "Yes." The feed showing Milton flickered. He covered his mouth with his hand, eyes red, shaken in a way I had never seen in my entire life. The final door to room 0 slid open ahead of me, light spilling across the floor in a stark white band. I stepped forward, crossing into the heart of the system I had been trusted to protect, fully aware that the person deemed insignificant that morning had become the only one capable of stopping the collapse of an entire economy. Room 0 felt colder than any other place in the building, a chill that seemed to seep out of the humming servers surrounding us. The national FinGrid map stretched across the main wall, peppered with pulsing red clusters that grew brighter by the second. Technicians rushed between terminals, their voices overlapping as warnings escalated faster than they could track. From my left, a specialist shouted over the noise that the attack had spread toward the SwiftGate network. The implication hit instantly if that breach connected. International settlements could stall across multiple regions. This wasn't an overstimulated drill. It was coordinated, targeted, and designed to hit where it would cause the greatest shockwave. The system lit up with a new prompt: Tier 5 override requires DC confirmation. I requested an emergency connection to Washington, but the line only spat static. Every attempt bounced off interference, and the silence on the other side was more alarming than the erratic alerts. A technician's voice broke as he asked how we were supposed to activate the primary lock without approval. The truth lodged in my throat: we couldn't, but failure wasn't an option. Before I could answer him, the feed from the corner camera snapped into view. Milton was pounding the glass of the holding room, shouting at the staff. He demanded access, demanded answers, claimed a right to information he had never earned. Guards tried to calm him, but his voice carried through the hall loud enough for everyone in room 0 to hear. He insisted I wasn't capable of handling this, demanded they find a real commander. I shut my eyes for a moment, steadying myself. He had no idea that the person he was pleading for had already been handing out the commands he imagined belonged to someone else. The alarms climbed in tempo, pushing the room to the edge of panic. The security commander stepped to my side, lowering his voice with a grave heaviness. According to Red Pen protocol, any emotionally connected individual endangering a Tier 5 operator had to be isolated. The decision fell to me. A single breath steadied my voice as I authorized the isolation. Milton was escorted away within seconds, still clinging to his own narrative of who I was. The room turned back to the screens, and I turned with them, pulse hammering in the base of my throat. It wasn't just a tactical choice, it was a personal fracture. The main display went blood red, flashing a new warning: primary database breach attempt detected, 30 seconds to override. Sheesh. FinGrid had never hit that threshold in my time working behind its walls. I felt the weight of every eye in the room. And then I moved. I fed the next sequence into the console, but the voice authentication rejected me. The system flashed an immediate failure notice, and one of the technicians gasped that the attackers were jamming recognition protocols. They weren't only breaching firewalls, they were undermining the safeguards that protected us from human error. It was intentional, precise, and far too familiar. Another alert blared to life. Unauthorized login detected internal source. Someone inside the building, or someone controlling an internal credential, was tunneling through a protected segment. The commander asked if he should revoke access for the entire staff except the core team. It was the kind of decision that carved pressure into your ribs. Disabling that many accounts would freeze dozens of people out of their own workstations. But the alternative was unacceptable. I signaled the shutdown. Right then, a faint crackle stirred through my earpiece. A voice from Washington whispered through the static long enough to tell me they were fighting to restore the line. The last words were the most important. The authority to activate full control had shifted to me. The connection died instantly, but it was enough to anchor the next move. A technician called for my attention again, hands shaking as he traced a pattern across the breach map. The attack wasn't random. It aligned down to the minute with the calendar of Milton's advisory group. A cold wave ran down my spine. His circle wasn't just connected to the building. They were connected to the breach timeline, whether it was negligence, infiltration, or manipulation. The pattern was no accident. There was no more time to analyze it. The final security layer waited for a command only I was cleared to give. Penhaven Protocol. The emergency sequence built into the system years ago carried a requirement almost no one knew existed. It demanded a secondary family identifier, a signature preserved from the original architect. My mother, her imprint on this system was the only part of her Milton had never been able to erase. And now, it was the key to stopping a collapse. I placed my hand on the sensor and spoke the identifier she had left behind. A code loaded with grief and history. The room held its breath. Then the system accepted it, locking down every compromised segment in succession. The attack was contained. Exhausted technicians dropped into their chairs. The commander exhaled like he'd been underwater. The display shifted to a calm green, stamped with the message, Incident contained primary controller, Penhaven, L. My heartbeat was still racing when the thought surfaced not of victory, not of fear, but of Milton, and how little his recognition mattered anymore. Room 0 settled into a suffocating hush, the kind that followed a storm but promised another wave. Most alerts faded from the screens, yet one display stayed blood red, pulsing in defiance, the final endpoint, the one breach still alive. A technician shouted that it connected directly to Denver's clearing center if attackers slipped through. The entire financial network could collapse backward. I scanned the routing map and felt my jaw tighten. The vulnerable node belonged to the same advisory network Milton bragged about. All these years he dismissed me as insignificant, yet the system he worshipped was the one threatening to drag the country down. The commander warned that sealing it would freeze legitimate transactions. It would hurt people with no fault in this fight. But the alternative wasn't damage. It was devastation. I told him to lock it. My voice didn't shake. A new prompt flashed endpoint. Critical, require Penhaven key. My mother's backup failsafe, something I'd hoped I'd never need. I placed my palm on the scanner and spoke the code, Penhaven 0. Within seconds, the system sealed the endpoint, cut every hostile connection, and washed the grid in quiet. Steady green, relief broke loose across the room. Applause. Tears. Disbelief. The commander bowed slightly, thanking me for saving Fingrid. Through the glass, Milton watched with trembling eyes, seeing me clearly for the first time. Not because he mattered, but because I finally stood exactly where I did, when the system finally stabilized. Room 0 exhaled as if the entire building had been holding its breath. I stepped into the hallway with 2 agents at my side, one handing me a rapid report incident contained. No data loss. Exceptional command. The words felt clinical compared to the chaos we had just pulled back from, ahead of us. Milton waited rigid, pale, and smaller than I had ever seen him. He didn't approach. He didn't bark orders or fill the air with his usual certainty. He simply stood there, afraid to move. A commander joined us and asked whether he should be questioned for interfering during lockdown. The shock on Milton's face was instant, as if the world had finally corrected his sense of scale. I told them he was coming with me. His shoulders sagged in relief. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice rough. "Leora, I never knew what you actually did," I answered just as steadily. It wasn't that he didn't know he never wanted to. That truth struck harder than any accusation. He lowered his head, and for a man like Milton, that gesture was louder than an apology. A nearby officer added that only 3 people in the entire state could activate the Penhaven Protocol, and I was one of them. Milton turned toward me, stunned into silence. Before we left the tower, I faced him fully. "From now on, don't speak for me. If you want to know who I am, ask." His eyes reddened as he nodded the first honest acknowledgement he had ever given me. Evening settled over Denver as we stepped out of FinSec Tower, the fading light casting long shadows across the pavement. Milton walked beside me, quieter than I had ever known him, searching for the right words. He opened his mouth as if to offer dinner, maybe praise he'd never given before, but I rested my hand on the car door and stopped him gently. I told him I didn't need a meal or a moment of approval. I had things to do. And I was all right. He swallowed hard before managing a single, fragile sentence. "Leora!" "Thank you." I stepped away from the Cadillac just as my phone buzzed with a final update incident contained. Stability secured across all regional clearinghouses. Report to D. When ready. A small smile surfaced, not pride, not triumph, just recognition. I finally understood my own worth. The sun dipped behind the Rockies, painting the mountains in gold. For the first time, I felt no weight dragging behind me, no need to shrink to fit the boundaries someone else built. I walked forward into the open Colorado sky, hearing the glass doors close behind me, separating me from the man who once defined my world, and reminding me that I now stood firmly in my own,